first of all, that it seems long past time that we do things like say, how should the dice work? It is sometimes a little frustrating because I'm coming in kind of from the macro to the micro. And that's sort of the opposite of the usual question in game design, which is, how do the dice work?
Right. I appreciate that.
Well, in this case, I kind of want to get to how the dice work too. Yeah. And one of the things we have to know, though, and I don't want to dissect it in detail, but I do want to know, is how do we get to knowing that it's time for the dice? And I guess if we were to take it to full-on D&D 4E territory, I would say, when do we know we're in an encounter?
Right.
And there are a couple of different vocabularies involved. You probably know them. First of all, we can talk about all the information that underlies a given set of interactions while we play among the characters. So the characters are undergoing any kind of interactions with one another. Or more accurately, our attention as players is now on the characters doing what they're doing. So who says, or knew, or prepped, or decides, or makes up what's going on? Especially in terms of what the characters don't know, or actionable knowledge that other people at the table either don't know or aren't in the position to make up. You can call this backstory if you want. And I guess that's a good word for it, is what I'm going for, the real kind of, if I'm bringing in a non-player character, who are they? If we're in a traditional game master situation. If someone says, this is my homeland. Anyway, the point being, in this game, especially given that you've got a more or less, I don't know how customizable, but more or less canonical setting. If not canonical, at least customized on a pretty specific template.
Yeah.
Is there somebody who is responsible for basic backstory?
Yeah, so the way I was thinking about it, I haven't really pinned it down entirely, but I was thinking that there would be the framework, and then there would be these sorts of like story callouts or like bangs that at least the narrator could add, but I was also interested in the players being able to add bits and pieces they thought were cool, but I haven't really fleshed that out how I want to do that.
So, however, for the most part, if let's take it to the level of a session. For the most part, if the owner of the new factory is due to arrive and put their production schedule into practice, which means, chopping down the sacred grove at the very least.
Right.
If that is underway, then you have me say I am playing the narrator role, and I will decide what the individual is like. I may have some tools to do that with in the game system, but I either use those tools. You see, when I say decide, I include instrumentation. So even if that means I roll randomly on a bunch of tables and I don't make any decisions by myself, I'm still the person doing it and bringing it to play.
Right.
So that's kind of what I mean more than anything else. So all right, so we've got that. Then you have the idea of the specific situation that the characters find themselves in, which in this case is pretty much the immediate framing of where the player characters are. And in a very basic fashion, as in many role-playing games, the simplest version of this would be the briefing scene. What do? We're going to have our briefing. We're meeting the corporate exec. giving us our job. We are, looking at the map in a tavern. We're listening to the rumors in a tavern, which is its own form of briefing scene.
Right.
Or whatever it is. But the idea, or maybe in a game that has a lot less in terms of go to this spot and do this thing, there is still somebody saying your characters are here, this other character is here, this is what they see, this is what occurs. Then the boiler room blows up and the ship starts to sink.
Right.
But whether it's action-packed or whether it's just a description of a quiet dinner at home, or whether it's when I start a Champions game, I say, well, it seems to make sense. I'm going to look at what your player characters are like, and I'll say, hey, seems to make sense that I'm starting with you on your first day at this new job. And I look over at you and I say, oh, well, your character's gotten out of prison, and maybe we'll just pick up with that parole officer. Sound okay? And so in some of my games, you ask questions to find that out. Other games, you just say, this is what you see. The player says in Troll Babe, I want her going here. And you say, okay, well, here is where the houses have purple roofs. And start to describe what they see. So, I think if the first thing was backstory, which is that the corporate executive is secretly doing inside trading and wants you to assassinate this other guy in this other corporation because the other guy found out about it, and he's pitching it as a corporate black op, but hey, you don't know that this guy is actually going to, get you to kill this guy for his own good, and he's probably going to want to cover his tracks by having as many of you die as possible. That's all backstory. Here, this situational kind of thing, and maybe actionable backstory in a bit, but situationally, you're saying you're sitting in the briefing room talking to the guy. Or you're saying, all right, the next night, you guys are in the stealth helicopter going through the neon lit city. This is what you might think of as situational. So the first is backstory, second is situational. Then, those, if you might think of, are kind of drilling us down into the point where you're asking players more and more and more constantly, maybe right from the bat, but certainly as you go along, what do you do? And we are now in the zone of the imagined space where everybody's saying what they do, and we are dealing with characters moving, breathing, talking, thinking, deciding, speculating, hitting things, and whatnot. So far, so good?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'm guessing that so far this is mostly narrator work with appropriate questions to the players as may seem appropriate. As may seem right for the game.
Yeah, so far.
Okay. Now we have to get into situations where activities have outcomes, where activities have binary or maybe multivariate, but results.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we're going to be in some kind of situation where we need results. Remember, any of these authorities I'm talking about may make use of instrumentation. And in a role-playing game, outcomes traditionally have the most instrumentation involved. So, although sometimes one wonders if you're talking about full-on dungeon prep, that might actually outweigh outcome instrumentation. But, maybe not. So outcome instrumentation and activities. So we're still talking about who says what happens, but but it may be any number of people, because you can say, what do you do? What do they do in response? You can say, what happens then? You can say, okay, given that outcome, what happens then? What do you do now? All of these things. And so all of this is its own kind of authority, is what I'm trying to talk about. because it will directly or indirectly or linearly or whatever yield results you can't walk away from, results you can't, there's no takebacks when all is said and done. So with that happening, we need to think about how many people are saying what. What you described earlier in your email had a lot to do with people describing the use of a given instrument, like pushing a die forward, the use of a given instrument as sort of the physical ritual that accompanied describing some fiction.
Right.
But the outcome in and of itself has a lot to do with what the value of the die is relative to what has happened so far. Or perhaps it has to do with the overall rack of dice that we've rolled and have looked at, if that's the case.
Right.
So we have to start thinking a little bit about this. We have to start thinking about what's being said, what's being established, how it relates. Do you look at a number first and then you say? Do you say first and then you do something and then look at a number? And what key decisions are involved? You've got two things happening simultaneously. You've got the outcome of the clash itself. You've also got the role, the potential of the curse coming in and building. And you want both of these to be consequential. The consequences for the characters are one thing, the consequences for the session are another. And we need to say, all right, these are the two things which are going to be heavily constrained or shaped by the instrumentation. But that doesn't change the fact that they are established through talking, and who says and utilizes or organizes the instrumentation is a big deal. Let's not forget, because it's easy to, that there are ways to add more content in the way that you talk about the outcome. So you can say, what happens? Well, we kill the guy. Well, there's always a little more talking, or often a little more talking after that. Often, that means that you simply color it up. Yeah, you kill the guy, and, as he dies, you can see that I don't know, his flesh melts off his bones and his arm had a metal skeleton or something like that. I don't know, making stuff up. But but do you see how the narration actually permitted revealing some of the backstory in that case? Right. Or you could have the narration do things like reveal something about what's going to happen next or what could happen next, which is very common. Now that you've killed him, you see that he's, the laundry ticket falls out of his pocket and you can pick it up and the next clue is on the laundry ticket. Just to use some very simplistic examples and perhaps not very fun ones. The narration in question can often be much more important and much more engaging than that, depending on the characters and what they wanted and stuff of that kind, the nature of the backstory. What I'm saying is that the narration of an outcome is not exactly the same as the outcome itself. And I'm talking about more than just coloring it up. My favorite example of coloring it up is, you critical hit on the goblin and you say, I got a critical hit, and so I'm doing this much damage. I'm doing 52 points of damage on the goblin, and and everyone just knows you've killed the goblin, and you make a sound effect because this is worthy of a little celebration. You say gunch. And you haven't gunched before. It's not standard procedure every time you hit something, but this time you do. And perhaps the fellow next to you at the table says, oh, his head goes like this.
Right.
That's coloring it up, and that's fine, and it is its form of narration. What's interesting about that kind of narration is that it's often ad lib and widely shared. I've been interested to observe many times in role playing that people can swear up and down that we are traditional players. We play our characters, the GM plays the world, and we all know that, and we don't violate it. And then such an interaction as I just stated can occur at the table.
Right.
And nobody thinks twice about it. Even though both of those players just thoroughly described things, and the GM's laughing away with everybody else, gives a thumbs up or something, just like someone else does, or maybe not even doing that. And so basically you realize that the narration authority is actually more widely distributed than anyone is noticing. But narration authority can also have those other elements too. I just mentioned plot elements, backstory elements, and you can have much more important things like emotional or other, kind of personally consequential aspects of a given outcome. It's very customized. You could, if this session that we're playing has a specific importance to one of the player characters, then this particular juncture in the plot may be deemed by everybody important to that player character, and therefore the outcome of that conflict or contest or battle or whatever, we all expect a certain amount of the narration to be relevant to that character in some way. Either the player delivers something or somebody says something to that character, or the narrator says, just to confirm, your sacred grove is safe, to that player character or to that player. So do you see what I mean? That narrational aspects of the outcome should really be considered their own unit.
Yeah.
Even though they often flow very directly, they really, really are incredibly distinctive from each time.